ZombieTech. Welcome to ZombieTech, a forum for engineers, scientists, and inventors to ponder on the technologies needed to survive the inevitable zombie apocalypse.
She's Eddie.
He's Whisker.
And who do we have this week?
This week, we have Ken the Beekeeper.
Oh, that's an interesting last name.
Yes. The Beekeeper.
Hello.
Like D-E?
Yes.
So it's like fancy.
Sure. Hi, Ken.
Hello again.
So, I think we met you on Twitter, and this past week and a half, we've been doing nothing but like beekeeping and mining.
Yeah.
In Minecraft. So I thought it was particularly appropriate because I'm a sucker for beekeeping in Minecraft. That Ken here is an actual real life beekeeper who also works on like freaking high powered lasers.
Yes.
Right.
I just got into beekeeping around 3 years ago. And their bees are awesome. And and so actually, what got me connected with you is somewhere, I think last March or so, I decided that I wanted to get more information about bees.
And that led to me?
Yes, it did actually.
That's really strange.
All paths lead to Eddie.
It's
Wait,
crazy.
that's really strange because I'm deathly...
search anything esoteric and it leads to Eddie's blog, I swear.
am deathly afraid of bees.
I want to look things up and I can't because the first result is always Eddie.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so tell me, how did you lead to me?
Well, so I wanted to get more information. The one big problem with beekeeping, and I'm just a hobbyist. I have 4 to 8 hives going at any one time, but nothing serious. But the big problem with beekeeping is that everybody has super strong opinions, but nobody has any data to back up what they think they know.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's. And one of the reasons for that is that it's really hard to get reliable data out of bees because every hive can be totally different. What's going on can be totally different, and every year is totally different. There's different weather, there's different amount of nectar flowing, and so it just makes it really hard to compare anything. So even if a beekeeper puts a whole lot of effort into it and has 20 hives doing one thing and 20 hives with another method, over a few years, they might not get reliable data. So whenever you talk to beekeepers, they always know exactly what the best way to do is and what works and what doesn't work, but they very rarely have anything to back it up.
Sure.
And that really bothered me because I work in science and engineering and I like to have data.
Sure.
So I decided to build beekeeping or hive scales to automatically send the weight of my hives back to the internet every few minutes around the clock and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I wanted to do that is NASA has this really sweet program where they have volunteer beekeepers measure their hive once a day. And you have to actually go out to the hive and measure it and write down the number. And that seemed ridiculous. So I said, I'm going to put a scale under my hive.
Mm-hmm.
And that just exploded.
Because the scale exploded or...
No.
The data exploded.
It kind of changed my life.
Sure.
Because it turns out that you can't just put any scale under your beehive because the digital scales use load cells that are very temperature dependent.
Yeah, they would be.
And
sure.
because it's going to be outside from like negative 10 degrees up to 100 degrees, you're going to have significant swings in the weight.
Sure.
And so that's not going to work at all. So I went out and got myself a $150 postal scale and started just hacking around to make it do what I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So I really kind of got into the electronics and hacking and I started following blogs and I watched all of your I listen to all of your podcasts.
Cool.
I listen to all the what was it, EEV blog, the Amp Hour.
Yeah.
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 And
Guys
that
are friends
really,
of ours, good guys. If you guys
yeah.
out there haven't listened to Chris and Dave, you should
Check 'em out.
theamphour.com is a good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. They're really amazing, and I've learned so much from just listening to them go on about pretty much nothing really, but they talk about engineering, and so at this point my goal was always to get it working for this next year. So I'm kind of somewhere around March I'll probably be installing the system. I need to have a scale working that transmits wirelessly. I'm using little XB radios
Mm-hmm.
to transmit wirelessly to my house. Luckily, I both my little apiaries, they're close to houses, so I don't need to learn how to use the cell networks. So they'll transmit weight and temperature, humidity, maybe a couple other things if I get it working. It'd be nice to count the bees too. There's a really great Instructables on this guy's counting bees. He's got them go through little turnstiles.
What?
Yeah, look on his Instructables. Look up bee counter. So I got in touch with him, and we've kind of been talking. I've got one of his boards, and I redesigned it to save a lot of power.
Yeah.
So now I'm into like uh, uh, laying out circuit boards, which is just
Yep.
crazy.
Yep.
And
I agree.
and it's so cheap. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like it's something you should not be able to do.
Right.
But yeah. So I'm laying out that circuit board, and I've got my scale working and talking to my computer, and kind of the last thing I need to do is harden it up. Maybe put in a couple extra scales as so I can get it working on more than one hive, and then figure out how much power I need, and then buy a big solar power system to power the whole thing. And
So,
so there's no guarantee it's going to work right away. But I've got the scale working, and it seems to be logging accurately. And there'll be a lot of bugs the first year, but it'll work. It'll work.
a lot of bees.
So many puns.
Yeah.
So many puns.
So, okay.
Oh, that's the story.
Now, so you say that like beekeepers always have their method, right? What do their methods entail? Like, what are they looking for, and what are they trying to control? In other words, what does it take? What do other people say it takes for a bee hive to function at its best?
Back in the 80s, at least I hear that beekeeping used to be really easy. You stick bees in a box, and they give you a lot of honey.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of over the last few decades, there's been a whole bunch of diseases and parasites that have spread across the world into all of the bees, except in Australia actually. But they're making inroads. They'll be there. They're kind of slowly taking over Australia now. And so there's a bacterium that causes problems. There's some tracheal mites that cause problems. There's these little mites that feed on the bees.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Bear Corporation.
Bears aren't good either. No.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think those guys with some of their crop stuff managed to kill off like 90% of the bees in this country.
Oh, Bayer. I thought you said bears. I was like, yeah,
well,
bears.
Bears can kill bees, but I don't think they can do it on the same scale that I'm talking.
Yeah, and the pesticides don't help. I mean, pesticides can generally be managed appropriately, but it certainly doesn't help. And yeah, they've killed off a lot of pollinators, if not honeybees.
Mm-hmm.
So between all of these things, it's really been tough for bees. And so now, a kind of a new guy like me who doesn't really know what he's doing, you kind of expect to have 50% of your colonies die over a year. And, it hasn't quite been that bad. I think I've had maybe 30% die or so. But but you lose them, and you don't always know why. Sometimes you kind of suspect there were mites that kind of grew, and you can use some insecticides in the beehive.
Mm-hmm.
There's some antibiotics, but if you overuse that, you're just going to make the problem worse through evolution and everything.
Yep.
So it's tough. So a lot of beekeeping right now is inspecting every 2 weeks or so and trying to identify which hives have a problem and what you can do to make it better.
Sounds to me
So-
like it's a monoculture problem for the most part, which is
No,
a
I
topic
don't-
that comes up on this show quite often. When a species gets too similar, more and more problems come up because it's easier for, parasites and various things to specialize.
Yeah, I really don't think that's the case in this with bees, and there's the reason is that there's a few. I've never heard of that being cited, and the reason I don't think that's an issue is that all of the problems have been due to kind of globalization, where a little mite that adapted pretty well to its normal host bee now is spread across the world into all of these European bees and it's all European bees being used for the honey production.
Mm.
And so now European bees are exposed to the tracheal mites and the I forget the name of the other little mites. I should know that. But the other the big mite problem, and then the nosema, and there's all sorts of diseases, and they never had to deal with any of that before.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a pretty good job of fighting it off. But when you got all of them at once, it's they just get overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And
So-
it doesn't help that there are insecticides all over the place.
Right. So it's not so much that like people are saying you have to keep these hives at this particular humidity, this particular temperature, this particular.
Really frustrating because the bees do all of that for you.
Mm.
It's kind of nice at the same time, but there's so little you can do to help them.
Mhm.
You give them a box and they'll take just about any opening. I mean, they'll go in your wall if you let them.
Yeah.
They do that all the time, and
Yeah.
and they're used to like dead trees where they go into some cavity and they just hang out there for a few years, and so basically you manage them so that extracting honey is easy, but there's not really much else you can do. You give them more space when they're collecting honey so they can give you lots of honey, and then in the winter you take away a lot of the space so they don't have to try to keep it warm. But even then it's not it's really difficult because they don't keep the whole hive warm. They just keep their little ball warm, so even insulating it doesn't really help.
Hmm.
Because if you measure the temperature inside the hive, it's about the same as the ambient temperature.
Hmm.
And so it's just this really hard problem. I mean, you can't insulate the hive over the winter. In Minnesota here, it gets pretty cold, and they make it through the winter all right, but it could be easier. It could be
Right.
Georgia or something.
Right.
But you can't insulate it. You could try to. You need constant airflow going through the hive. Otherwise, the water will, their water vapor from their respiration will condense on the ceiling and drip down onto them and kill them.
Mm-hmm.
So you constantly need to be removing water, and so you could try to reheat all of the air that's flowing through the hive, but that would just be ridiculous and expensive. So I I struggle for a long time as a laser engineer. I really wanted to put something in the hive that would actively help them, and I think there's a reason nobody does that. Is you just can't find something.
Mm.
So this ability to monitor them in real time and there's a few people who have done it. They haven't really documented what they've done very well. I'm kind of hoping to come up with something that I can spread to the world.
Sure.
Even that's going to be really difficult because kind of going through the numbers, I think getting weight with a postal scale that costs $100,
Yeah.
and then solar panels on it and radio transmitters, it all adds up to around $1,000 for a few beehives.
Right.
So it's not as cheap as I'd like, but I can work on that, and hopefully I can, especially for some hobbyists that might have power and an Ethernet cable out to their hive, then it could actually be just a couple $100 for a system. So
So let's take a back step real quick. how did you get into keeping bees, and how did you start it? Like, you just took a cardboard box, stuck it in there, put some frames and a queen bee. You know, like how did that all start?
Yeah. Well, I read a whole bunch of books. So it's really good to start around in the fall or in the summer, because you purchase bees around January, around now actually. You need to put an order in, um, and then in March or so you get a package of bees, and you got to be ready for them because they're coming whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Um, so so you need to read up on it a lot. Um, and uh, so basically, what you do at first is you put together a box, and it's I don't know, it's a we use a you can do it really cheaply. You can just do a top bar hive, and which is basically just a trough you can put together with scrap wood, and put little bars on the top, and you kind of guide them to build their honeycomb on the bars,
Mm-hmm.
and there you are. But most people use um, a Langstroth hive, which is designed to have frames that are really easy to take out and put back in and manipulate. They kind of work well with the centrifuge that takes the honey out,
Hmm.
and um, and so basically you just order the wooden pieces, or you could cut them yourself if you, but it just takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So you order the wooden pieces, and you put it together. I think a beehive, I think I calculated it costs around $300 with the bees
Okay.
to start. So it's not too bad.
And how
Um,
many bees do you put in the first?
yeah, you buy a package of bees, which is a really ridiculous concept.
I'm
Uh,
thinking of them like in a vacuum pack, and like when you like devacuum, they like start buzzing. That's
yeah,
that's what's happening in my brain right now.
they come in a little wooden box with screens on two sides, so
Ah,
you can see them, and they're this just big clump about the size of a big grapefruit.
oh my
And if you
gosh.
shake the box a little bit, they all kind of do this jiggly thing because they're all it's one big spring with all their little legs trying to hold on.
Yeah.
It's really cool, and they're just buzzing away. Oh, you know, bzzz, and if you bump them a little bit, they buzz a little bit louder, and it's really kind of freaky the first time.
Yeah, I'd say.
All in this box, and they're they're screened up. They're not going to hurt you. And they actually come to Minnesota to Stillwater. There's a guy who gets two truckloads of them every year, 2 weeks apart, and he just sells them by the package. You get 3 pounds of bees, which is around 7,500 bees, and there's a
What?
queen, and there's a queen in a separate little cage in there. And so the bees didn't meet the queen until they got on the truck, and
Oh.
they threw them in a package. And so they put the queen in this tiny little cage, and put a screen on that tiny little cage so the other bees can't kill her.
Oh.
And over a few days, she keeps giving off her pheromones, and pretty soon they all decide that she's actually their queen, and they start protecting her instead. And then you can let her out.
Oh.
So by the time they get to you, they've already accepted her as their queen. It's really actually kind of convenient. It's really cool how that works because you get this bee in this little cage, and they all try to kill it because it's not their queen. And 3 days later, or
They're
so,
all
they all decide it's their queen because they all
right.
smell like her.
Yeah,
Um,
they don't have a very long-term memory, I
no,
don't reckon.
no, not at all.
Huh.
And then you just dump them in. I mean, it's actually pretty violent. You have to get them all through this little hole. So you just dump them. You're really careful with the queen because she can't die. But
Right.
you got 7,500 bees. You need most of them to end up in the hive, and they're actually really really gentle at that point because they're not trying to defend a hive. They don't have a hive. They don't have a home. They're not in defense mode.
Oh.
Um, so while I always do beekeeping with at least a netted hat on
Yeah.
because I really don't want to get stung in the eye or the throat or something. You do most of it in just shorts and t-shirt, and you'll probably get stung once or twice. But if you're okay with that, it's not hard.
I am not okay with that.
And that's the thing. If you are not okay with being stung, and after you're stung a couple times, you'll change your mind. But if you're not okay with being stung, you wear a bee suit and you won't get stung.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
they'll get stung once a year or something. They'll get through somewhere. But it for most people being stung, it really isn't that bad. and um, you just kind of it's a whole lot easier to do beekeeping with shorts and bare hands. And so if you can deal with it, then it's not too bad. The bees are also really, really nice. If you use a smoker properly and it's a nice day outside, they're out collecting honey. They're working. You could pick up a frame that's full of bees and just stare at it, and none of them will freak out. None of them will try to sting you. They'll just keep working because they're in that mode. Now, if it's a rainy day or it's going to be a rainy day, there'll be 1,000 bees in your face trying to sting you.
Why?
So you they just have that reaction. They also do that in the fall when they have a lot of honey and there's no nectar coming in. So I think it's instinctive on a rainy day. It's something about the pressure, the atmospheric pressure or something. I don't know.
Huh.
And also when they're in defense mode, when they're not collecting honey.
Maybe
So
with the higher air pressure, like they've all got headaches, and they're
Yeah,
just like,
maybe.
"What is this?"
No, but certainly when they're defending honey, that's obviously an evolved reaction to, we need to survive for the winter.
Right.
We're not collecting, so we might as well be defending.
Right.
So
So
they
then, so you take the honey out. So like it's now winter, obviously. I'm guessing you took the honey out before
Yep.
winter. So what do they do now? I mean, they're like all
Left-
sad and
I left-
without honey.
You need to leave them around 60 pounds of honey. I'm usually pretty conservative, so
60 pounds? How many pounds do they make?
they can make a lot. So every year I usually have 2 or 3 really good producing hives, and each one will produce maybe 50 to 75 pounds of honey.
Wow.
Uh,
Well, now,
that-
how often? Is that like every...
No, that's once a year.
Oh, okay.
So that's how much I take for the year, and then I leave 60 pounds or so over the winter, and they probably eat a half of that.
Okay.
One thing about bees is they're really stupid over the winter. They follow the honey around and they'll eat themselves into a little corner, and then it'll be cold, so they're all huddled up in this little ball, and they won't go find the honey that's 2 inches away. They'll just starve right in that little corner. Kind of have to make sure they don't. Right now, just this week, I inspected my hives and I found they're both really strong. They both have probably 10 or 20,000 bees. I don't think of it in that term, so that's just a guess.
They all have their punch cards going through the turnstiles.
But they probably have 8 frames of bees in each hive. I mean, they've got a huge ball of bees in there, so they're going through honey faster than kind of normal. But if I can keep them from dying, and I probably will, I don't intend to. But if I don't let them starve and I make sure they have food right next to their ball all winter long, then they're gonna go really strong into the spring, and I'll probably have to split them into separate hives.
Sure. Now explain this to me, because I'm obviously the amount of knowledge I know about beehive keeping is about as much as Feed the Beast Minecraft has given me, which means absolutely nothing. So say you see your little ball and they're huddling, right? And then 2 inches away there's that honey. Do you like scoop that honey and then stick it around them, or like how do you help them?
You take out the frames. You take out the frames and you put a frame that's full of honey right next to them.
Oh.
So you put it, and sometimes you take off a frame that's just at the edge of the little ball. So maybe you're going to sacrifice a couple bees if they can't make it back to the ball because it's so cold.
Mm-hmm.
But you put it right next to them so that they say, "Hey, we're really hungry. There's some honey over here," and they all kind of shift that way. Because they'll search a little bit, but when it's so cold, they can't break the ball, and they're not intelligent enough to say, "Hey, everybody, let's move past this empty area and go find some honey over here."
And they slow down, right?
Oh yes,
Okay.
yes. They're still pretty active, but yeah, they get really slow. They don't do much flying. Because they're gonna die. They freeze. They're cold blooded. So
Right. So just a step back. You were talking about like bees not defending their hive and such. So like when they've established this hive, and say you take out the frame with the queen on it, do they get particularly like busy?
No.
No?
Not too bad. They have it really depends on the day. And if it's a really nice day and there's nectar flowing, and that's the big thing, it's hard to tell when nectar's flowing unless you see the bees on flowers.
Mm-hmm.
But on a nice day in the middle of the summer, there's usually some nectar flowing, so usually they're pretty good. And um, you if you move everything really gently and don't bump anything, that's a really kind of important thing because you bump them
Mm,
and that one bee gets freaked out,
mm.
then that bee will release their
Freaked
warning
out.
pheromone,
Yeah.
and all the bees around them will freak out and they'll release their warning pheromone and it just kind of it snowballs.
Sure.
Smoke is also really really helpful. You'll have bees. There'll be bees, little bees lining up on the frame, staring at you, just going, just wait, I'm gonna get you. And then if you blow a little smoke, and they all run back down inside, and it's no problem. So,
What is it about smoke?
um,
Is it like they think there's a fire and so they want to protect?
so I think so. Again, there's not a lot of really good research.
Mm.
There's some scientific papers out there suggesting one thing or another, but I think everybody kind of agrees that it's two things. One, they have this runaway reaction,
Mm-hmm.
and they go and they gorge themselves on honey, and that's probably, in case the fire comes and they all have to leave, so that they can have some energy to start a new hive somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is it also masks their alarm pheromone,
Oh, sure.
which interestingly smells just like bananas. So
You can smell it too.
oh, absolutely, you're taking care of the beehive, and on a day that's going to be rainy in later on, the whole beehive they'll all buzz around you, and you'll smell bananas like nothing else. It's amazing.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't think banana scent would set them off because I think they can tell the difference. But yeah, you smell bananas really strongly, and then you need more smoke
Right.
because
That's cool.
you need to calm them down a little bit. Yeah, and you can really tell when one bee in that hive freaks out and goes after you. They all start buzzing because they definitely notice that there's a alarm pheromone, and they set each other off.
Hmm. Okay, so then, like, are they not smart enough to figure out that you have been taking care of them for the past however many years?
No, no, not at all. And some people will sing to their bees and things, and it's kind of fun. But in the summer, I think the average lifespan of a bee is somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks
Oh,
because they work themselves to death
sure.
as fast as they can. The same bees will last the whole entire winter because they're not wasting energy making new brood. They actually have to keep their little ball a little bit warmer.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be almost exactly 95 degrees plus or minus like two
Hmm.
for brood to develop properly. So they need to keep it in a really tight range, and they're really good at that, but it just wastes energy. So they'll let it drop down to, I think it's 70 or 80 inside the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they keep it a little warmer than that, but I've heard that they let it droop a little bit lower than what is ideal for brood. So
Sure.
um,
So then, are you planning on like putting little temperature probes like in different areas
I
of the
really
hive?
like that idea, and I'll probably do it next winter.
Okay.
But I think over the summer that's less useful because you'll see where the brood area is, but you already kind of know that because
Mm.
it's in the same spot every time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also kind of complicated to make a big array of temperature sensors and then have that work even during inspections when you rip the whole thing apart, inspect every frame, and put it back together.
Oh, sure.
So
Sure.
you have to do that every 2 weeks, and I have little children. I don't have a ton of time, so
Right.
it'd be nice to. So I think at first maybe I'll put one or two temperature sensors in a hive. I had this really great ambition to put like 100 temperature sensors in a beehive, and I still want to do that, but I think that's mostly going to be useful over the winter, where you can actually see their little warm ball move across the hive,
Right.
versus in the summer,
That'd be
where what
totally cool.
yeah, absolutely. In the summer, um, I'll send you a link. There's some people who have measured data from their bees, kind of long term, every 5 minutes or so, and you can see they're all sleeping overnight, and then suddenly in the morning they all leave the beehive, and so you can see the weight drop by a few pounds, and then they start bringing back nectar, so it slowly ramps up until the nighttime where they all come back, and then over the night they they evaporate a lot of the water because the nectar has way too much water. They needed to get it down to 18% to be honey,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're evaporating water all night long because they can't do anything else. And you see the weight slowly drop over the night until the next morning when they all leave again. So you kind of see exactly what's going on, and I think that's really that, along with kind of a basic idea of temperature, is going to be what's really useful. The other thing is this guy Hydronics on Instructables. He's got a bee counter, and
Mm-hmm.
that counts every bee going in and out. It makes little gates about the size of a bee so they can get in and out, and it has two little sensors, two little proximity sensors, IR proximity sensors on each gate, and it tells you which way the bee's going. Um, and he's got really cool data from that, showing when bees are going in, when they're going out. All of the new bees, they spend a week or so nursing,
Mm-hmm.
basically taking care of all of the young bees before they go out and fly. But on a really nice day, all of the young bees who are taking their first flight will go out at once in like a 20-minute period, and they'll all kind of do figure eights and zip back and forth, memorizing the landscape around the hive.
Yeah.
And so you see all of these bees right in front of the hive, and he's kind of caught some sign of that when a lot of bees go out for a little while and then they all come back a little while later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it looks different. So that might be useful information. It's kind of hard to say what you'll actually learn from it until you get all the data.
You could have like a
Um,
mini scale. Not only could you figure out which bee or like when bees are going out, but you could figure out the weight of the bee going out. And maybe like certain bees go out at certain times and like the young ones are like at time for afternoon lessons,
yeah,
and then they're the ones who go out in the afternoon or something.
yeah. The other thing I really want to do is, and I'm not quite sure how to implement it, but um, people often mark the queen so she's easier to see. They'll put a
Mm-hmm.
little dot of paint on her,
Right.
and it just stays on her on her shell, and she's just fine. And I would like to put retroreflective paint on the queen
So
and
it's
use,
easier to find her with sensors.
yeah, and use some IR sensors. Actually, I think I kind of decided not to use retroreflective paint. I'd probably use the tape that they have, just kind of make a little punch out a little circle of it and glue it on. I think that would certainly make her easier to spot. So if you put two little sensors in where she usually lays eggs, if you can tell that she's there once a week or so, um, then even if you get hit only once a week, that could allow you to inspect the hive and disrupt it much less often. You still have to make sure they don't have a disease, and you have to manage it for other things. But one of the big reasons, especially in commercial beekeeping, that you have to open up the hive is to make sure the queen's there. Because if the
Uh,
queen has died for some reason, they'll spend about a month making a new queen because they have to turn a new egg into a queen, and that takes 20 days.
hmm.
And then the queen has to go out and get mated, and then it needs to start laying eggs again, and it takes 20 days for those eggs to start hatching. So it you really lose about a month of production, and that hive won't make any honey if it doesn't have a queen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
So then,
so
So say your queen dies. Do you just dump all your bees into a little
oh no,
box
no, no.
and
Usually you just dump another queen in there.
oh, but they
You,
won't kill her?
well, you have a little cage that you put her in.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I see.
Same
when you
trick.
buy yeah, same trick. When you buy a queen, it comes in a little wooden cage with a screen on it, so the bees can feed her. And the bees that are really close to her, they try to kill her, and then pretty soon they realize she smells like them,
You're
and
not so bad after
yeah,
all.
yeah, and then they
I
start
see.
feeding her,
Okay, I
and
get
then
it.
they take care of her, and then pretty soon that spreads through the whole hive.
Got it. Wicked sweet.
I
Pretty
know
cool.
they're
Now
incredible.
you were talking about, the fact that it's been really hard lately, and by lately we're talking like 10 years,
Yeah, yeah.
due to I think what they call colony collapse disorder, where you just lose a hive and not know why.
Yeah, well,
Um,
actually, that there's a lot of kind of bad reporting about that. Colony collapse disorder is a
More of
really
a general term, right?
it's a really specific term, actually.
Is it?
That's the problem. It's a specific term for when over the space of a few days your bees all just leave the hive
Hmm.
and don't come back. There's other diseases that will cause them to die. Bees usually, if they get sick or damaged or something, they'll fly off somewhere else to die so they don't infect the rest of the hive. But there's this weird colony collapse disorder where suddenly, over a week or two, all the bees will be gone. And the only bees that are left will be young bees that hatched and are nursing the other bees. So you'll have this tiny little colony left, and it's a really weird symptom. It happened really badly, I think, in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And don't quote me on that. I probably have the year wrong.
That's around then, I think.
Yeah, there was a really bad year, and since then it hasn't happened nearly as much. Those specific symptoms. Now colony losses have still been high, and so there's still all of these other things that are, especially the mites and the varroa mites. That's what they're called, varroa mites, especially. But they weaken the hive for all the other things. And
Now, there's one I have to bring up on this show, right? Like, there's no way that I could get away with not bringing it up. Zombie bees.
Oh no, I have never heard of zombie bees.
So, evidently there's some parasite fly.
Oh yes,
that
awesome.
gets into the bees, and when it's in there, the bees will leave the hive at night, and they'll just stumble around on the ground outside.
Yeah, I have heard of that. No, I think those are hornets. The zombie bees.
Nope. It says honeybees.
Yep, honeybees.
That have been inhabited by tiny flies that cause them to abandon their hive at night and lurch about erratically before dying.
That is totally amazing.
I mean, I guess at least the bees know to leave their hives.
Well, if this parasite is controlling them, it probably has them doing exactly what it wants.
I guess, well, going away from the hive and...
Yeah, so that they'll die, and then the larvae can hatch and
eat
bee brains. And
if it was better, they'd probably force it to die inside the hive, which would be...
and then it would be able to spread, but it hasn't evolved quite yet.
Well, I think the flies need to develop outside the hive.
Oh, I see.
That's usually how it is. There's a small hive beetle that's mostly a problem down in the south, but it needs the larva. It needs the larva to drop down through to the ground so that it can develop down there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the beetles come back inside the hive.
Gosh, that's it's like your downstairs neighbors, always causing trouble. They drop downstairs, they breed, and then they go back up and cause
and
havoc.
Eat all your stuff, yeah.
Right? What's up with that?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, there's just so many issues. But yeah, zombie bees, yes, there's quite a few insects that do that too.
Yeah. Quite a few of them have actually came up on the show before. But I absolutely had to bring that
Well,
one up.
It's ZombieTech.
Zombie bees, ZombieTech, obviously. Now, the other thing is that I'm sure a lot of you listeners out there have already made this connection, but how many of you guys out there know how to make honey?
Oh.
Anyone? Okay, now your second question. How many of you guys want to be able to have honey after a zombie apocalypse takes out the world and then we win and we rebuild society? Do you want honey?
Yes.
That is why the Beekeeper is on this show. Because, man, honey is tasty. I mean, it may be like bee regurgitation, but it's yummy.
Yeah, bee puke, yeah. No, I disagree. The main benefit you're going to have from bees is it's going to more than double the output of all your crops.
That's a good point,
True.
too.
You got bees on your land, it's going to... I've seen apple trees totally ruined because somebody had put a beehive next to them, and they weren't used to having so many apples on their branches, and then all the branches broke.
That's funny. Really?
Yeah.
That's really
funny. It
funny.
Didn't totally ruin the tree. It came back, but like they didn't get any apples that year because they all kind of broke the branches and fell off. It was incredible.
It's kind of ironic.
Yeah, bees will more than double because they'll make every single flower productive.
Right.
And so you'll get fruit or vegetables from every single flower, and it's
interesting.
It It's really, really helpful.
Yeah. So you got honey, you got wax, you got pollination of crops. Anything else?
Ooh, wax. That's right. We can make candles.
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
done that from beeswax. Yep.
What else can you make with beeswax?
You need a lot of bees to make that much wax.
Oh.
But you know, in a zombie apocalypse, I guess, you know, what else do I have to do except make beehives, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right now I don't have time to deal with more than 5 or 6 because, you know,
zombies haven't eaten everyone else at work, so they still make you go in, right?
Yeah. What's the deal with that? It's crazy.
So then, how much space do you need for your bees? Like an acre, or is it more like a variety of plants, or what?
Oh no, the bees fly 2 to 5 miles.
Oh.
They can go 2 miles, 2 miles without kind of losing honey.
Mm-hmm.
I think 5 miles is where they have to start eating the nectar, or is the limit, the theoretical limit, where I think it's been observed, but they have to start eating the nectar that they collected in order to bring it back.
Oh.
So yeah, they go really far. They'll go 2 to 5 miles. So it's actually hard to limit where they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if you have a little garden near them, yeah, absolutely they're going to hit it, but that's not going to be the major source of nectar unless you have acres and acres of some crop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
no.
So yeah, it's really, you know, you have to be careful. My parents have some beehives near a marsh, and they're actually not that productive. My dad's kind of waiting until he retires to start an apiary somewhere else that might be a little better.
Sure. Huh. So then, okay, this is totally a silly question, but let's say you've got 2 like sister bees, and they happen to be like princesses, right? You know, they're both like the queens.
Okay.
And you put one into one hive, like that's 2 feet away from another hive. Mm-hmm. Now, are their pheromones going to be different enough?
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah. They each have unique signatures.
So it's like a fingerprint almost.
Basically, yeah. And the bees will defend their hive against other bees. And the exception to that is when nectar's coming in hot and heavy, and they're all rushing back and forth. If a bee comes in with a lot of nectar, they can kind of bribe their way past the guard bees, and often they'll become part of the new hive because, you know, then they'll smell that pheromone and they're not that bright, and so actually if you have a lot of beehives in a line, they'll come back, and some percentage of them will get confused and go into the wrong beehive, and they'll all pile up on the 2 outer hives, and the middle ones will have a much lower population. So it's good to kind of stagger them and put trees in between them so they kind of have landmarks and don't get so confused.
Sure.
Yeah. By the way, this behavior doesn't work very well in human society. I mean, if you've ever gone like through the mall and smelled a bunch of ladies and asked them if they're your queen, guards do show up.
Oh man, that's amazing.
So, yeah, you know, I guess that's true.
You know, some of that is like, yeah, but
you know this. I mean, I would assume so, but
I make no.
Gotta put yourself out there.
I make no claims about understanding Whiskers Past. So, you know, like, okay, so I'm gonna slightly change direction here, but so we got bees, but then we also have freaking high-powered lasers. Now, what do you mean by high-powered lasers?
Oh, that's such a hard question. Lasers are... So the first thing you have to understand about lasers is that there's so many different kinds. They're... And they all do unique things. So so the laser pointers you have kind of work well as laser pointers. They also kind of work well as Blu-ray readers, and you know, and laser readers, the little diode lasers. You know, it's going to be hard to explain in
to bring the layman up to speed. A laser is basically coherent in light. The photons are mostly moving in the same direction.
I don't think that's going to bring a layman up to speed.
No, I mean, photons are usually like bouncing all over the place, crazy. They're having like a photon party. But in a laser, you've bounced them back and forth enough that they're all sort of going in the same direction. Yep. But different wavelengths change the behavior of how it interacts with various matter and whatnot.
Yeah.
So you deal with high-powered lasers. What does high-powered mean? Just more photons?
Whatever you want. Yeah, exactly. Just more photons. And in the big, the difficulty of making more photons is usually that you got to cool it off, and you have to. A lot of materials need to relax a little bit before they can emit another photon. So in my case, I have I work with some a few 100-watt excimer lasers. They're kind of similar to the ones that are used for silicon wafer annealing, for flat panel displays, for some of the cheaper flat panel displays. But they're also used by kind of Intel to pattern in photolithography. But I've also worked with some femtosecond lasers, and one really interesting thing about power is its energy per time. And so when you get the time really, really small, your power goes up. So I had I think it was a 50 microjoules or something. No, it was 2 millijoules. I'm pretty sure it was 2 millijoules, and it was a 50 gigawatt laser.
Gigawatt.
Just because it had to put out the photons at such a high frequency.
No, in such a short time period. So it was putting out a few millijoules in 50 femtoseconds. So that's 10 to the negative 12 seconds. So it's just such a short time that the power, the watts, goes through the roof. So you get
just for that precision.
Well, just for that tiny amount of time, you had a 50 gigawatt laser. Now they also usually cite average power, and so average power is really low on that laser. That was the highest average powers. Well, outside of like military and stuff, is usually the CO2 laser, where you'll get kilowatts, many kilowatts, tens of kilowatts, which is ridiculous when you think in my world where I usually work with excimer lasers, because I work with ultraviolet light, and ultraviolet light absorbs much, much better in almost every material, but it's much harder to make because it's hard. It's just excimer lasers are really nasty and complicated in order to get that ultraviolet light. And so
now, when you say it's absorbed by more materials, is the absorption important for like converting that into heat energy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you shoot if you shoot a CO2 laser at like 10 microns, like the wavelength is 10,000 nanometers, there's a lot of materials that just don't really absorb much of it, and it'll actually, a lot of the laser will just pass right through the material, and so it's really hard to cut that material with a CO2 laser, because it just doesn't absorb at all. If you use the femtosecond laser, where you put all of that light into a really small amount of time, then you actually get nonlinear effects that make it absorb many, many times more than you would expect, just based on the linear things. Because when you get a whole bunch of photons in a small amount of space in a material, there's nonlinear effects, so you get kind of many exponents that determine how much absorption you get.
So, okay, let me ask.
I think the scientific term there is that you've got lasers and then you've got frickin' lasers.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, wait, so let me ask. So, by a material absorbing a laser, do you mean like you're cutting into the material without going all the way through? Or is it cutting through the material? Or none of the above?
Oh, it's kind of... It's cutting into the material. So if you shoot a laser at a material and it absorbs in it, there's usually a threshold for where it'll start. It has enough heat to either ablate, where the material will blow off or melt.
Okay.
That's usually what happens. Usually it ablates or melts. You can have some other things, and so you just need to have enough energy per volume for one of those things to happen, and if it doesn't absorb enough at 10 watts, then you need a 20-watt laser in order to it could be that 10 watts is plenty to ablate a material, but if it doesn't absorb well enough, then
you need to go just a little bit above.
Yeah, then some of the photons fall out the other end, or get absorbed by a larger volume is what really happens. So the energy gets spread over a larger volume and it doesn't have the effect that you wanted.
Sure.
So
So what type of materials are your lasers trying to cut?
well, the excimer lasers are really good for doing lithography where they can be absorbed by photoresist.
That's right, you did mention photolithography.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it just gets absorbed by kind of a wide range of materials. When you deal with um, when you're trying to modify the properties of some material, it's really helpful not to have to tune the material to the laser. So to put some dye in it or something, or find exactly the right material. It's nice to be able to play with a wide range of materials so you can find the material properties that are best for the process. And UV really helps with that. For the UV lasers, often you can't do the process with a certain type of metal or a certain type of plastic because it just doesn't absorb. And so often you run into that. People playing with the laser cutters find that all the time. Some metals will take 10 times longer than some others, just because of their absorption usually.
Gotcha. Now, bees and lasers, how do we combine those two?
Oh man, put a laser on a bee, I guess. I mean, there's some crazy
I will
kind of
cut the
lasers.
queen. Pew!
Now,
Whoops.
one thing that would be really cool that is kind of running around in my head is to mark some of the bees. Now, you're never going to mark all of them,
Right.
but if you mark 100 of them, just spend a day, grab a bee, put a little dot on it, then you could shoot a laser or even just a flash bulb or something, and have a camera above it, and those bees are going to light up with the retroreflective tape, and they're just going to light up like a light bulb. You'll see this really bright spot going wherever it goes,
Right.
and you'll be able to get that return anywhere in the line of sight if you use a laser, or even a bright light source, because the retroreflectivity is so strong. So kind of mapping where they go could be really interesting.
Cool. And let me ask real quick. Do you know how to make a laser? Like
Yeah,
from scratch?
yeah. I can make a CO2 laser. CO2 lasers aren't too bad. Yeah, and you can grind mirrors and stuff. In the context of a zombie apocalypse, I have to admit that I think that lasers are too advanced for anything that you would want to mess with.
Well, just
um,
killing zombies. You could
you're
you
not
could
gonna kill
outfit
zombies with
each of us with a laser gun.
yeah, but you're never gonna do it.
Why not?
There's a reason we
We've
don't have
got
laser
you.
now.
We've got you. We've got all the other smart folks.
So yeah, you can make a laser gun that starts a zombie on fire, but all that effort would be better put into making gunpowder and a cannon.
I
Yeah,
suppose.
because you're never going to keep it running. It's going to break down the moment you find a zombie, and it's just so specialized, the laser stuff.
But that's why you're here.
Yeah. If you demand lasers for food, then I suppose I could give you a laser.
Laser the corn kernels into popcorn.
All right, before we
Bam.
get too far off track with Addie's laser
My imagination.
cannon zombie apocalypse
Which would
adventure
just be
story here.
awesome.
There's a few questions that we like to
We
ask
always ask.
every new guest on
It's
the show.
true. What 3 tools would you bring into a zombie apocalypse bunker?
Oh man.
Namely,
So-
our house.
So after listening to all of the zombie tech episodes, I had to actually think about this for a while, and I think I have to just go straight back to survival mode.
Okay.
Because for beekeeping, there's nothing really that you need. I'd be happy. There's hundreds, thousands of guys in Africa doing beekeeping with no protective equipment. I can handle that. I can handle being stung near my eye. It's not going to kill me. So, the first thing I would want is some really good hatchet.
Okay.
So useful for many things, and also for beekeeping. The bees stick things together, and we often use a hive tool, which is a lot like a little crowbar hatchet thing. So that's the first thing I'd want. Second, I really struggle with 3 because I really want something to purify water and something to start fires.
Okay.
And I suppose I could, I don't know. I think maybe I'd have to go for something to purify water.
Okay.
I'd probably some tablets, um, that'll purify water, keep me from getting cholera while I'm trying to find some safe bunker
Well,
somewhere.
here, of
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
yeah,
You're just
you
down
know,
the street from us.
yeah. But it'll take me a few days if I can't drive. So,
I guess
you
we
know.
can come and pick
He
you up.
doesn't get eaten on the way.
Well,
Right,
we'll
exactly.
come and pick you up. We need the bees.
Hopefully, he gets eaten and not half eaten, because he'd be more dangerous if he were half eaten.
That'd be awkward.
Yeah, but we're you want to avoid getting dysentery or cholera while you're trying to get somewhere safe. So
Sure.
I'm gonna have to go with water, and then finally, um, I'd really like to have a reliable bolt action rifle. And it'd be easy to service. It's probably not going to help me a whole lot against zombies. I'm just going to assume that either I'm dead or I'm safe. I found somebody who has a safe bunker somewhere, and but it's so helpful to be able to shoot a deer and just have it dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to wrestle him.
Chasing it down, yeah. Like what are you gonna do? Shoot a bow and arrow at it? Yeah, that could work, but
I know lots of guys who do exactly that with some success.
Yes, and that's true. It's just I don't have much faith in my ability to shoot an arrow
It
at
takes
a
years and years of practice to get good
right.
at that.
And I'm sure we'd be working on that for years, but for those few years where nobody knows how to do it, I'd like to have a good bolt action rifle because I can figure out a bolt action rifle. I can make replacement parts if we've got metalworking. It's it's not nearly as breakdownable as all the semi-automatics out there. So
Mm-hmm.
it probably won't.
Some people who might refer to themselves as preppers or whatever fill the bottom of their home with canned goods and spam and MREs and stuff like that. We are cramming the bottom of our zombie apocalypse with the means of production because we want to be sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then I'd hope at some point you could make gunpowder and get this.
Just kill a bunch of creepers.
Oh, that's horrible.
Okay, so.
All right, so we got hatchet.
A hive tool.
Yeah, we got a hatchet. It's a hatchet. We've got
I want a hatchet. It work. I'd use it as a hive tool, but
right.
a lot of other things too.
Right, water filtration system, and
bolt action
rifle. And I would also like to add.
You can tell I don't own a rifle because I'm not specifying what kind.
That's okay. I don't even know what a bolt action rifle is. Oh. I'm sure our resident rifle expert knows, and he's probably just like, "What?" But
are you serious?
Yeah,
we're gonna have to talk.
Well, go back in the shows.
Yeah, I know.
Listen to his episode.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. But I think I might end up strapping a beehive to your head or to your back. Maybe your head, because that'll be funnier when you're coming down the road. Because you are the bee dude, and there's no way in hell I am going to have bees here. Like,
yeah.
To
if I
you're
have
gonna have to bring them
there, and I can actually drive down there, then yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
I'd duct tape them up, strap them down,
yes,
and just bring them down there. That works beautifully.
Excellent. And okay, the last question. What book would you bring to the zombie apocalypse bunker?
I don't have an answer for that one. I tried so hard. Find a book. I mean, I really like to answer the improvised munition manual.
Okay.
Because that's, I think I'm gonna have to go with that, just because I don't have a better answer. If I was gonna be stuck in the middle of nowhere, where I bet there's good survival books out there, but I spent a lot of time in the Boundary Waters. I kind of know how. If it's going to be for a few weeks, I should be okay. Otherwise, I'm dead anyway, so who cares? but the improvised explosive ham is, it's stuff that I wouldn't normally know how to make, and I would never be able to come up with on my own.
Yeah.
And that would be really, really useful if you had to survive a zombie apocalypse. So.
All right. Now, we're going to ask you for some links and stuff for people. But first off, I think on this episode, one important thing to add here is you said you read a lot of books to get going into beekeeping. If anyone's interested in learning more about that kind of thing, what book would you recommend them to get started with?
I really highly recommend Beekeeping for Dummies.
Yeah.
It's just a really good, accessible book that gives you all the information you would need to know to start. I mean, I'm gonna struggle. There's the Beekeeping Bible. It's called
Hackerbee.
No.
That's his
and now
site.
I can't remember what it is.
Furious Googling. Googling.
Beekeeping Bible, Biblical Beekeepers. Oh man, this is horrible.
So while you're looking up that, I'm going to just let folks know that he's on Twitter as Deamateur. So like diameter, but D-E, amateur. And his site is hackerbee.com. And a lot of there's a big scary bee on the front. And, yeah.
We'll put some links to those on the description on the show too.
Of course.
Yeah, and so there's Beekeeping Bible. It's around 1,000 pages long, maybe 1,500. It's got it's kind of dated now, but not much has changed, and it just goes through every detail of physiology and with references, and it goes on forever. So start with for most people, reading something like the Beekeeping for Dummies will be great, but if you just get obsessed and you can't get enough information, you'll quickly hear about this book. And I'm gonna remember it as soon as we're done. But it's if you look out there for this big Beekeeping Bible, it's really incredible, and it's just goes on forever about every detail of bees and what is known, and it tells you what's known and what's not, and it's just great.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll figure out a link for that one after the show.
Yep.
I'll get it to you at some point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thank you for joining us this week, Ken. It was really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not often you get to talk to someone who has such an esoteric skill set.
Yep.
Sure.
Unless you're us on this show, you probably beat the curve on that one.
A little bit.
Yeah. All right. That's it for us for this week. You guys can find this show every Thursday. ZombieTech.tv. There's an RSS feed on the page if you want to have it automatically downloaded to your phone, iTunes, whatever, or you can just listen to it on the page. It's really easy. That's it for us. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.